Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at our panel about what makes a successful podcast, what separates them from the pack. Uh, I'm John Lashinsky. I am the lead organizer of the Canadian Podcast Awards and PodCamp Toronto, which is a unconference we have in the city here in February at the Toronto Metro University. I think that's what it's called now. And it is a great community gathering for podcasters in the city and across Canada. Today with me, I have Alex Nursall. She is the co-creator slash writer, director, and producer of the award-winning horror fiction podcast Parkdale Haunt, and plays the character Judith on the show as well. She is also a recent addition to the cast of the actual play D&D podcast Dice Shame. Outside of podcasting, she works as a commercial casting director at a post-production studio in Toronto and has her non-podcast writing appear in a number of publications, including Flair, McSweeney's, Bar Down, The Toast, The Canada Land Guide to Canada, and more. In her spare time, she enjoys hiking and F1, like the cars, Formula One.
Yeah.
And has never really gotten the hang of writing bios, no matter how many she's had to do. I pay someone to do mine. Next up, we have Michael Mangiardi. He is a comedian, podcaster, and co-founder of the Sonar Network, a Toronto-based podcast collective. You may have seen their booth downstairs next to the Canadian Podcast Awards booth. They have a wheel that you can spin and win prizes, except it's happening now, so tough luck.
We'll do more.
He's been involved in podcasting for over a decade and currently hosts... You don't currently host any podcasts,
No,
do you?
dude, you didn't ask me for my bio. You used an old one.
But he has won 7 Canadian Podcast Awards and was voted one of the top Toronto podcasters multiple times. He's also won an award for Best Male Host. Is that good, Michael?
Thank you.
Is that up to date?
Yeah, I haven't won an award in a while.
You still won one. Rob Norman is a Canadian Screen Award and Canadian Comedy Award-winning performer. He is the creator, director, and writer of CPC's Limited Capacity, a spooky fiction podcast about how relationships are transformed across the internet. Rob's self-improvement podcast for people who hate self-improvement, Personal Best, was featured on Time Magazine, Vulture, and the Irish Times. Personal Best returns to terrestrial airwaves this fall on CBC Radio 1.
Woo.
Thanks for joining me. It's great to have such a esteemed panel of podcasters and award winners. So to kick off, how many in the audience here have a podcast? Awesome. Is anyone here thinking of starting a podcast? Oh, great. This is for you then. So why don't we start with how we define success? That can mean a lot of different things to people. You know, some people do it just because they want something that their friends can enjoy or something that they want to make a living through. How do you define success, Alex?
Oh boy, that's an existential question right off the bat.
Yeah. Getting deep.
I know. I feel like when it comes to, I know like the show that I work on, Parkdale Haunt, is a fiction show, and the biggest thing for me with that was the biggest success I felt so far is how creatively fulfilled I have felt doing it. That's been a really big part of it. I mean, obviously things like getting downloads and having like building up fans and listeners, it all feels really, really good. And those things like also do play a big part in it, but like in the very sort of like micro, like this very internal sort of way, just having something like that I'm working on that I feel so incredibly proud of and has felt so good to work on has been like a massive part of that.
Awesome. Rob, what about you?
I was ready for Michael to talk.
No, we're jumping over him.
What is success? I think like success is it is the impulse to keep making the thing. So if you are making, I have another podcast I didn't mention in my bio. It's an improv podcast for people who want to learn how to improvise. It's very inside baseball. We're in episode something like 250. My partner who I make it with, he doesn't edit. He doesn't do any of that work. So I have to do it all on my own. And when you start seeing people interact with the thing that you're making, that is the thing that keeps you going, making episode after episode, edit after edit. So community, I think, is really the answer there. If you have a community and people are engaging with you and they care about what you're making, like, honestly, I think I'm 2 weeks behind in our release date, and I feel so guilty. People are wondering where these episodes are. So I feel like if you have a community, I think that's the thing that allows you to keep going.
Mike, you've been around a long time.
Yeah.
How's success changed over the years for you?
Yeah. So, yeah, like podcasting, I've been a fan of podcasting since probably the beginning. And it's, as an industry, it's grown and changed. And I think success in the beginning, in the early days, there wasn't a lot of monetization. It wasn't as important. It was really all about community and finding an audience and just connecting with people and getting your voice out there. The cool thing about podcasting is it gives a platform for basically anyone to get their voice out there, tell their story with basically no barrier to entry. And there's still podcasts like that now, just people just talking into a mic. And then there's also super professional, highly produced podcasts that make, that people, it's their career now. So success kind of comes in so many different ways. It's kind of whatever you want it to be, I think. It's some people just want to talk and tell their story and don't care if anyone listens. And some people just want downloads and want sponsors and want to make money. And so I think the unique thing about podcast is it's kind of, there's a big spectrum of what it can be, and kind of success depends on what the person wants out of it. Is that a cop-out?
Oh, that's great.
Cool.
I wish you talked first. I like that answer so much. It was such a good answer.
I was like, it just gives me warm fuzzies. It feels good. So
Spoiler alert, I'm going to be leaning heavy into the community aspect of podcasting. At PodCamp, the organization I mentioned at the top, it's all about bringing podcasters together, growing a community. Same with the Podcast Awards. And community is like a key driver of growth for us. And it seems like like you were saying, Mike, in the original podcasting days, in the early days, community was a big thing. Is community still like an important factor, Alex?
Oh, what a misdirect. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge part of it. I mean, you can do a show by yourself, and I know people who do that, and they do amazing jobs. I know that I could not. I could do something that's okay. I could not do the stuff that I work on now without other people. And I think finding really, really good teams to work with, and also meeting other podcasters has been really great. Coming to something like this, our show originally dropped October 2020, which was a real isolating time for everyone.
Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've kind of, it's all a blur, man. But it's been nice to actually get to meet people and be part of this community and actually expand that a lot. And yeah, it's great.
Rob?
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, community is a huge part. If you're thinking about making a radio show for Canada's a very hard market to make a radio show that everyone likes. How are you going to make a radio show that people in Nova Scotia like, that people in British Columbia like, and people in the Yukon like? It's very challenging. There are very different experiences in all of these provinces. So making a radio show is very hard for CBC, but making a podcast, you're not kind of hindered by any kind of boundaries. So if you're able to find a community, you could find, 100,000 people who are really into building boats from scratch. You have a hit podcast in that market. So finding that community, finding that market for yourself, I think is super important.
And building that audience, how do you reach out to those people? How do you find those people, Michael?
It's something that Rob just said kind of reminded me of something that kind of answers that question. Finding your audience, and the cool thing about podcasts, because there is so many, there's also a niche for anything. So yeah, like woodworking or gardening or anything that you're interested in, there's probably a podcast there about it. And just a real quick story that I found kind of funny. I was one time asked to do someone's podcast, and he gave me the address, and I showed up, and it was a light bulb store. And I was like, am I in the right place? This is a light bulb store. And they're like, oh yeah, the podcast is in the back. And then I went in the back, beautiful studio, nice studio that he had built. And I was like, wow, this is something strange happening here. And talking to him about it, it was just he had a podcast about light bulbs, and he was the only guy with the light bulb podcast. So anyone looking for a light bulb podcast found this guy's light bulb podcast.
I need a light bulb podcast now. I want to listen.
Well,
to
he's
this.
already doing it.
I know. I want to listen to this because this guy sounds like a light bulb.
So,
And
yeah.
more than enthusiast, I would say. Professional?
Yeah.
So it's kind of word of mouth that I'm getting from this now, because now we got one more listener for a light bulb podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways, but finding your niche and finding your audience is definitely key, because the problem with podcasts right now is there's so many. I forget the number, but it's in the millions, over 2 million, I think. And a lot of them also aren't active, but sometimes it's hard to, they're all listed on Apple or Spotify. Everything is there, whether it's active or not, or whether there's been an episode anytime recently or not. The algorithm maybe helps a little bit, but everything is there, and it's hard to rise to the top. So it's tough, but it's finding your audience, through community and through communities, whether it's like online communities or Reddit or whatever. Finding an audience and trying to reach them and target them is a lot more. You're going to find a lot more success than just like putting your podcast on iTunes and then hoping people find it.
Do you have any tips for once you've found that audience and once you're engaging with that community to maintaining that, Alex?
I mean, I think a big thing is consistency. Like, if people know what to expect going forward, like, the obvious thing is, like, are you releasing on like a schedule? Are you doing things like once a week, once a month, blah, blah, blah? And is that clear? Like, we release once a year, we do 5 weeks, and that's it. But when it's coming, like, and it's established, like, we're doing that. We have 10 months of production and then 2 months of show. I think that, like, doing that, it sort of instills like trust in listeners too. Like, I know I've listened to shows where, like, I love them, but then they just disappear for a while, and then I'm like, I guess they're done, and then they sort of reappear, and then they disappear, and I'm just lost. And I think that can be a huge killer. I think trust. Yeah, that's the first one I could think of.
Anything to add to that, Rob?
Oh, yeah. I think consistency is super important. I think engaging with your audience is really important. If someone's taking the time to write a review or leave you a message on whatever Facebook, Twitter, Instagram you're using, write back. Like, start a dialogue. I think that's really important. Have people write into your show. That's a great way to engage with them, right?
Michael?
Yeah, Rob took mine. I think engaging and connecting with your fans and your listeners, or whatever you want to call them, is super important. But as well, consistency is so important. And so those are my answers, and I don't have any others.
Awesome. One of the things people get caught up in when they're thinking about starting a podcast is, editing and format and, is it going to be good enough? Will people want to listen to it? Do you have any advice for people who are thinking about starting a podcast? Is there a specific format that's like a key to success, or is it, wide open, Michael?
Yeah, I don't think I wouldn't say there's a format that's a key to success, and I think the most important thing to me is to be unique to yourself. If you listen to a podcast and you're like, oh, I like that, I want to do that kind of thing, I think you won't have as much success as just doing what is true to you, your voice, and telling your story, how you want to do it. I think you're going to find a lot more success that way than trying to emulate someone else, because like there's a lot of podcasts out there, and if you're emulating someone else, they're probably going to be more interested in whatever you're emulating than you. So do something that is more true to you. That's what
authenticity.
Yeah, that was a short way to say that rambling stuff I just said.
We hear a lot about like authenticity at PodCamp. People want to connect to someone who's being genuine. It's not, putting on airs, I guess. So yeah, that's usually our biggest tip. We tell people just to start and see how it goes, see what happens. You can really overthink it and give yourself a lot of stress trying to figure out, and you'll never put anything out. Jumping off of that, there's a balance that you have to keep when you are a podcaster and you're in this industry. How do you keep balance in your life while being a wildly successful podcaster, Alex?
Balance. Oh my God. That's an option? No, I mean, like, I think, I do that. I work full time outside of doing the podcast. So it's all a careful balancing act generally of like, when am I going to be completely overloaded with work and when am I just going to be like lounging around on like my chaise longue, as the episodes roll out. Welcome to October for me. Yeah, I think I that's a funny one because normally our timelines are so condensed that personally it's like I know that if you're doing a show like how we're doing it, it's like you get to this stage and you are just in crunch time. But I think that like especially if you're doing something that's more consistent, if you're doing something that's weekly or monthly or whatever, yeah, figuring out your schedules, figuring out how you're going to do that, and if you work with a team, like actually having everyone understand their role. And I think that's something that I've seen has killed a lot of people, where like they're like, me and my 5 friends are going to make a podcast, and then they do not establish who's doing what, they don't set it up cleanly, and then it just turns into a huge disaster zone because no one knows what they're doing and no one wants to take responsibility, or someone takes too much responsibility and they get mad.
Yeah, planning, right?
Oh my God.
Mike, you run a network, so that must be a lot of planning. How do you find balance, and how do your podcasts find that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of I mean, a lot of what you said is very true. Like it's important to have roles, for everyone to have roles and know what their role is in the show. You know, especially in what we do in the network, right? I mean, like I said before, like also some podcasts are just people talking and friends hanging out, and that's fine. It's like if that's what you want to do, and that's fine, and that's great, and that's perfectly valid. But if you were taking podcasting seriously, I think, yeah, you do need to have roles and know what's happening. And then again, of course, consistency. And that the best way to lose listeners is, as you mentioned before, but the best way to lose listeners is just to not do an episode one week or let a few weeks go by, and, you know, just make it feel a little more confusing and less, you know, less, I guess, professional almost, if you just start kind of missing episodes and yeah. So I don't know if I answered the question. I started
Yeah,
going somewhere else.
You nailed it. It was perfect.
Yeah.
You're all on networks, right? Yeah. Are networks, like a key driver of success for all of you, or no?
It does help. It does help with a lot of things when it comes to like more like I find sort of the like what I'd describe as like the admin side of things when you're dealing with like sponsorships and you're dealing with advertising, when you're dealing with all those kinds of things. It is very, very useful to have somebody alongside you who has that experience, because it's daunting getting out there. It's daunting putting your show out there. It's tough to try to get advertisers and all this, especially in such a saturated market. So having sort of like the name and the team behind you and like is really helpful. And I think all the networks are different, so like depending on what your show is like and what you're looking for, it's all like you've got to do your research, but it does. I have found it helpful.
And Michael, you run a network, so you probably have a unique perspective on this.
Yeah, so our network is obviously would be a little different than yours and CBC, of course, but it's like, it's more of an independent network, and so we're just more about our emphasis is community. That's what we want to do, is kind of bring people together, lift up people's voices, and to cross promote and share share with each other, share listeners, and share each other's success. That's kind of our goal. It has been since the beginning. Of course, we're trying to monetize the shows and get everyone some money for their work as well. But yeah, our goal is largely community based as a kind of an independent network. Yeah.
Rob, how do you get noticed by a network?
How to get noticed by a network? If you wanted to make a show for CBC, there is an online form that you could fill out right now. So if you went to the CBC website, you could just fill it out and put in an application for a show. Yeah, I think like CBCs are obviously great resource to have. We put together this show called Personal Best, which was a kind of a prank show, a kind of like Nathan Fielder helping people show. And we found that having the CBC email was really great at getting experts. People would come onto your show. Without that email, it's a little bit harder to convince people to come onto your podcast sometimes. So that's a great boon. But I feel like, when you start joining a major network, I think the assumption is that once you get there, you're not going to have to promote. You're not going to have to kind of sell your podcast. And it's just like you're in the situation that you're in right now. You just don't have a CBC email address. You're still going to have to promote. You're still going to have to hustle. And it's really cool seeing other Canadian podcasts make really important podcasts that's getting a lot of notice, and they're flexible and they can maneuver maybe you would be able to if you were part of a big network. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's still very much like kind of a little bit of like an unknown territory at this point for a lot of places. Like there's still a shocking amount of freedom because like we're with a larger network, and we have full freedom to just go nuts, and it's very fun. So in a way that like if I was doing this as like a TV show or something, there would be a lot more restrictions, or like somebody like checking the script beforehand and telling me I can't do that. But yeah, my co-creators in the audience. But yeah.
Michael, what should podcasters prepare when they're pitching a network?
Definitely a well thought out pitch. I appreciate rather than just like an thoughtful idea or something that hasn't really been put work into. Like we'd love to see to even hear an episode, a sample episode, a demo, or something to get an idea of how it sounds. But at the very least, just like a clear outline of what you're working on. And that's the main thing. It's too many times I just get like a couple sentences. I have an idea, and me and my friends are really funny, and I think that everyone needs to hear us. And it's like, okay, I don't know what that is. It sucks though. It sounds like it sucks.
Alex, can you share with us what you put together to pitch to Frequency, or how that all came about?
Yeah, I feel like we're a little, I don't know if we're a little bit of an anomaly, but we came up with the show idea in early 2019, I think. Emily's nodding. That's good. Again, the last few years have blurred. I don't know dates anymore. But we came up with the show idea. We started writing the scripts, and then we started sort of putting it together very slowly, just sort of feeling it out. And then we had, I think, 5 episodes basically ready to go when we started shopping around to networks. And we had, I know we didn't send them our first episode. We sent them our 5th, because that one felt the strongest. We were able to at least be like, here's the basic plot, here's the plan. We had our plan. We knew it would be a 3-season arc. So we could go in and say like, here it is, here's how many episodes it would be. Here is a sample. It's like basically close to done, but it's our best one. And I think that like you don't have to give them episode number 1. You can put something in there, but at least give here is a last time on kind of thing. And yeah, when we were shopping that around, that I think having that episode, or even I think for anyone else, like a part of an episode that's like good, ready to go, is a big help, because it shows them what you can do, versus just saying, me and my friends are super funny and we should like be given access to a studio. And I'm like, everyone thinks their friends are funny, like, yeah. And most of the time they're not. So. Sorry, my hot take of the day.
When you're pitching a podcast, don't you also have to solve a murder? Isn't that important in every podcast? That you solve at least one murder.
I forgot to mention, we do require that.
Well, yeah. I just had one of those like those things, like those old 90s like cards where at the end of it it's like solve a skill testing question. I'd do some basic math and then just send that in. Oh, that's
Awesome. So doing any amount of effort into your pitch is the key. Guests. on your shows. Those can be a big driver of earballs, as we call them in the industry. Um, how do you get guests onto your show? Obviously, the CPC email address helps get some high profile people on, but the Sonar Network's had a lot of famous people on it as well. How do you reach out to these guests? How do you make these contacts?
I just gotta throw my weight around. No, a lot of the good thing, especially after pandemic, the game changed a lot. I was very, very anti remote guests on podcasts before pandemic. I was, and there is always a nice energy when everyone's in the same room. Generally speaking, the energy of the podcast is better. But the pandemic took that away from us, and it made that suddenly became impossible. And so we had a lot more remote guests, and people learned how to work remote like that, how to edit around the kind of weird awkwardness you get with internet stuff. And it opened the door a lot, and it made things easier to get bigger guests too, because suddenly you don't need them to travel to you or to come to your studio or to come to wherever you record. Now you can just take an hour of their time or whatever, and so yeah, I mean, a lot of people it made it a lot easier, and just if people have something to promote, and you might get some listeners to listen to them to hear their thing, you can just pitch them a guest spot and hope for the best.
Jumping off the remote thing for a second, how important is quality to your podcast success? Should you be editing out all your ums and ahs and coughing and editing out eating a sandwich while you're doing the show, or does that not matter?
Don't eat a sandwich. Well,
I feel like this is a leading question. I don't know.
Don't eat a sandwich during the show.
Go to a doctor. You're coughing that much? Go to a doctor.
I really want a sandwich.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, you should put some effort into the edit. I think, breaths and ums and ahs, I don't mind. I like that naturalism of it. But I also like the idea of listening to something that someone's put effort into. If I'm going to spend an hour with you, hopefully you've thought it out. Now, you could have a podcast like Alex's, which is very complex and detailed and very well produced. But let's say you even have a podcast like Smartless, where you just have 3 of your buds and you're going to sit around and do jokes. Did you write out what your bits are going to be? Do you know who's saying what, who's asking what question? It doesn't seem like that's going to make a big difference, but it really does. It really does elevate. So just those extra little bits of effort, I think, really pays off.
Can I jump on that? Yeah, and I think when it comes to something like doing fiction shows and doing these ones where you're trying to build an entire world, it's really easy to get super, super intimidated by sound design and trying to create these complex things and all that. But a little goes a long way, but the biggest thing is learning how to use it right. So you can do something that's very, very simple and that doesn't involve layers upon layers upon layers of stuff in Pro Tools, but it's all about understanding how these things work. How do you layer in sound effects? How do you actually mix these levels? Because that's the one thing that a simple podcast is great, especially in fiction stuff. It can be wonderful, but if things aren't mixed right, if things are kind of awkwardly placed, if you're not paying attention to timings, or editing, leaving in some breaths is good, but there is a point where you have to start taking some stuff out. That's where things start to fall apart, and you start to notice it. And that's the quality control that has to happen.
Mm-hmm. And there is. I mean, you'd also get better at it as you edit more. You can look at the timeline and you'd be like, oh, there's an cut that out. But yeah, there's also tools you can use that, and they might not work super great. You might need to finesse it a little bit. But there's tools that you can use where you put your audio in and it will take out pauses, take out filler words and stuff like that. So that's a way that kind of people can maybe make it a little easier on them to increase the quality of the way your show sounds.
Mouth declickers are those are a gift from the gods. Oh my god, take out those mouth sounds.
and I think some of the barriers to access might be I don't know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I'm oh, I want to make a fiction podcast. How do I do it? I don't know anything about editing. When we were making our fiction podcast, we had this big issue about sound effects. We were we don't have the budget to hire someone to make everything sound real, and it being real was really important to me. So it's oh, we're going to record this in a studio, and then we want it to sound like a bar oh, how are we going to do this? We're going to find the budget for this. And we found a really good solution. And it was just to go to a bar and record it there. And so it's like, oh, I want to sound like I'm driving in a car. Well, get your phone and drive in a car and record it safely. Like, do it safely. You know what I mean? But there's ways around it that you don't have to have an incredibly huge budget to make the show that you want.
I think you came to outside my condo and we recorded something in the park.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
So,
it was great. You were great.
Yeah, it was cut out of the show though.
We used real people instead. I'm sorry, Mike.
No, it was bad.
Should
I was terrible.
apologize.
Is there a target length for podcasts that work the best? That's something people ask us a lot about is, is an hour too long? Is it too short? Should it be 15 minutes? I had someone ask today, is there 5-second podcasts? There absolutely are. Is there a target length people should be aiming for when they try and start out? Anyone?
I get asked that question all the time. And of course not. Of course, it's like, it depends on the show, and it depends is kind of the answer. For me, and it's also preference, right? For me, I think less than an hour is the sweet spot for me. When a new podcast downloads on my phone and I go to listen to it, if I see it's like 2 hours, I'm just like, oh, here we go. Let's strap in. But if I see it's 40 minutes, I'm like, yeah, rock and roll, let's do it. So that's personal preference, right? Joe Rogan's the biggest podcaster in the world for some reason, and that's my hot take of the day. And his shows are like 3 hours long or whatever. So people obviously like that too. Yeah. And you know what? I bet there is a podcast that's 5 seconds long.
100%.
There are, yeah.
I bet there's hundreds of them.
A lot of them are like daily news stuff too, like just quick hits.
Yeah.
About the news updates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just, it depends on what you're doing, and it depends on like what kind of story you're trying to tell. Like, is it something that's better broken into like 6 15-minute episodes, or where you have like a cliffhanger at the end of each one of them, or is it something that should just be like slammed down in front of you, like 2 hours long, strap in, we're doing this whole thing in one go. A really important thing that I learned very early on is understand what page count means to time. And I'm going to be forever roasted for this, because when I pitched the Parkdale Haunt is basically 3 people. It's me, it's Emily over there, and it's Ian, who does all of our sound stuff. And when I pitched the show to Ian, I was like, yo, man, it's going to be pretty simple. 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes most per episode. Every episode in season 3 is over 45 minutes. And he will never let me live this down. Every episode for the whole show has been like 40 minutes. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm not good. I work in commercial advertising stuff, so I'm used to like very short scripts. So the idea of like multiple pages, I'm like, it's fine. It's like 15 minutes. It's not. So like sit down and read stuff out if you're trying to figure your timing. Don't do what I did. Or do what I did. You're just great. Screw it. Go right into the wind.
Yeah, it worked out great for you.
It did work out great. So I don't know how it worked for Ian, but
I think these guys nailed it. Yeah, any length.
Awesome. So I guess bouncing off of that, what are some things that you wish you had known, or some mistakes you've made along the way that people should know about before they make the same mistakes? Alex?
Oh boy. 1, learn what page count means to time. Yeah, I think there's a lot of them are things like I find are things like how like script writing, how to lay out sound effects in a script that's effective in a way that you can hand it to an engineer and you can say like, hello, here's what I need, because like it's sometimes you need to lay things out like very, very specifically so that you understand timing. Sometimes you can just sort of be like kind of vague and just kind of let them go nuts if you trust them. That was a big learning curve, and I can see it like, and I look back at old scripts. And just I found it's a huge thing about learning how to work with other people. Like, that's there's like the ups and downs of that. So mostly it's been very ups, which is great. But every once in a while you're like, oh, right, I got to be a better communicator.
Mike, any downs?
Any downs? What do you mean, any downs?
Like things that you could learn from?
Oh, yeah.
Same
sorry.
question.
Same question. Sorry. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, because we were saying podcasting has kind of grown and really evolved in the last 10 years or 15 years since it kind of started. and there was kind of when advertisements started coming in, and then there was this kind of this movement of like, that's bad. People shouldn't put advertisements in the show, and I think what I've kind of learned, and I think audiences are starting to learn, is that I think that's okay, and these shows are all free, and you get to listen to them for free, and the only ways that these artists can get paid for their work is if they advertise, and that's okay, and that's and you should be okay with that, and just being okay with that, and understanding that that's how the way the industry is going. Was a big change, and I think just accepting it and being happy for your favorite show that they've got a sponsor and they're gonna they are getting paid for their work that you get to listen to for free.
Rob, what would you tell 20-year-old Rob who's about to start a podcast?
Whoa, that's cool. So I'm still printmaking? Wicked. I would tell a young lithographer, Rob Norman, record in a small room.
Oh my God.
When I first started podcasting, I thought a bigger room would help me because there was less stuff in it. So find a small room. If there's anything that you can bounce a ball on it, put a blanket on it. If you have windows, throw pillows on it. That's a good help. If you don't know a lot about microphones, get the simplest USB microphone you can. Like, it seems like, oh, I'm going to upgrade, but the more tech you add, the more things that can go wrong. I would suggest getting a Riverside account if you don't already have one, and record with your guests in a separate room. That's great for audio. Also, please Google the name of your podcast before you release it. See how many other podcasts have your name. Whoops. Those would be my hot tips for now.
That's a good one. Yeah, make sure
Yeah.
the name's not in use and copywritten somewhere else,
And it's getting harder and harder to find
my
one that's not in use.
like
yeah.
domain names.
Yeah.
Any other pieces of advice you'd like to give the audience before we jump into questions from the audience?
I mean, I think that like when it comes to a question I feel like I've gotten a number of times is like about story writing. And I think the biggest thing people do, I think you touched on this before, is they overthink it. They get like really, really like, I don't know if this is gonna be any good. I don't know. And I'm like, if it like sit down, write it out. If it feels good, go with it. It's very, very easy to overthink it and to like focus so hard on like, I have to make all these characters perfect and I have to make all this stuff like this arc amazing. And I'm like, no, just like start writing, go, and then go from there. If it feels good, do it. And yeah, like there's room for flaws. Like, and these things will evolve. And when you get into the booth, that script will evolve. You will change things in there because you'll realize what doesn't work. And when you edit, you will find things that doesn't work and it will change from there. And that is okay. All of these things are living.
Yeah, that's great advice. Michael?
I mean, we talked about it before, but I think just it's super important, is authenticity, I think. For me, it's the most important thing, and it's the biggest thing that's overlooked because I think people just, they see something they like and they want to kind of do that same thing. But I think just authenticity and doing a show that you love and that means something to you, it comes through to the listener. Yeah.
I think one of my big obstacles is rejection. I'm not really good with it, so I'm a perfectionist. I want to make everything perfect. And I think the important thing to realize is the audience doesn't want it to be perfect. They just want something to listen to. And so like my favorite podcast is this podcast called Thin Edge of the Wedge. And it's about archaeologists who uncover Assyrian artifacts. And it's just an old British man talking about the things he found. And that's a very special podcast for me. And he probably has no idea I'm listening to it every week. I'm like, oh, another Thin Edge. This is awesome. So I'm sure your podcast is someone else's thin edge of the wedge. So go make it.
Awesome. Let's do some questions from the audience. Just come up to the microphone in the middle of the room if you have any questions, probing or otherwise. And just give us your name, and if you have a podcast, let us know what it is.
Hello, my name is Jason. I do not currently have a... Hi, Rob. Hi, Mike. I do not have a podcast currently, but I have a question, which is, do you believe that there is an oversaturation of podcasts right now? And if so, how would one stand out amongst the sea of podcasts?
Does True Crime want to take this?
Oh, me? Oh, yeah, solve a murder. No, yeah. Michael described a kind of like white noise, and I think that's totally true. I think a lot about one of my favorite shows, which is called Nirvana, the show, the band. Have you ever seen Nirvana, the show, the band?
The band, the show.
Oh, I screwed it up. The band, the show. It films all around Toronto, and what's so cool about it is it started as a web series. They're just kind of roaming the streets, doing a bunch of, I guess, kind of like they're doing scenes, but there's real people involved. And there's this one scene where they got a float and they tried to drive it into the Santa Claus parade for real. And I go, that's insane. That's an insane thing to do. So for me, when I'm thinking about podcasts, I'm going, what can I do that creates a conversation? So how can I push this forward? You're going to have this conversation about, I don't know, Mike, what's a good idea for a podcast?
About strawberries.
Strawberries, great. Well, what can I do to set it aside from the hundreds of other strawberry podcasts out there? Can I do whole episodes in the fields? Can I talk to people picking it? Like, push it a little bit forward if you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with fiction, my biggest thing when I listen to a show is because there's like when we started, like the fiction stuff was like it was all indie, and then the next year it was like holy shit, there's like Stephen King and there's like 15 Marvel ones, and every celebrity is now in a podcast, and now the entire chart is celebrities top to bottom. But I think the biggest thing, but there's still a lot of like indie podcasts that are doing really quite well in the fiction stuff, and I find the biggest thing is that the way I always think of it in my head is if I'm listening to a fiction podcast, do I like the characters, and if I like put my head to their chest, could I hear a heartbeat is the way I think of it. Are they real? Or do they just feel like a trope? Or do they just feel like someone's trying to just do something like shocking that'll be like, oh my God, I gotta tune in next week to see what happens to but and sometimes that does work. You can just do stuff with like tropes, and you can make it very silly, and you can do all that. But I'm like, yeah, the stuff that appeals the most, I find, at least to me, is stuff where it feels like I believe that these are real, that these could be real people, and it's about that stuff is phenomenal. There's some beautiful work out there.
Yeah, and Alex brought up a good point too. A great way to be successful is with your podcast is to already be famous. That works really well.
Solving a murder, being famous.
Yeah. But I mentioned it before too. For just your everyday person trying to find a little space for their podcast is finding your audience some way. Whether it's like if it's a D&D podcast, then maybe you find a D&D group online, or you get involved in some kind of D&D community. And then you're able to find your audience. You can target them a little better rather than just posting it, casting a wide net on social media. And I have a D&D podcast. Most people don't care, but if you can target those people, you might have a little more success. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, find the people that care.
Find the people that care.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Mark. Question is, so I kind of got from listening to you that you're all primarily doing audio-only podcasts, but I'm wondering if you have any experience with like audio-visual podcasts on platforms like YouTube and Vimeo, and any thoughts you have on pros and cons?
Sonar dabbled with that a bit, right?
Yeah, we dabble with it a little bit, doing some live shows, streaming online. Not too much. I mean, we're mostly audio, but YouTube's great, especially because the YouTube algorithm is really good for discoverability. Discoverability on podcasts is a little tricky right now. Spotify is making it a little better. It's getting better, but it's not like the YouTube algorithm, right, where new people are discovering stuff all the time. So, even if you're not doing a video podcast, even posting your podcast to YouTube can help people find your show and get the audio to your show. If you have the time, bandwidth, resources to also do video and audio, then of course you should do that. And you'll hit more people, you'll find more people. It's you'll give a different experience. Some people want audio, some people want video. At least both options are there and available. But it's a lot of times a bandwidth issue, and is it worth it to do both because it's a lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah, I recently went from making an audio podcast to also doing it on YouTube. And so we use this website called Riverside, which is a great website to use. We were recording our audio already. So they take a video while you're recording. So it's really easy to put that onto YouTube. I did notice that when we started adding video, it changed the kind of context of our podcast. It started to feel a lot more like a YouTube stream. But for the most part, technically, it's pretty easy to do if you're interested.
Yeah, there's other. Riverside's great, and there's another similar service called Zencaster that we use a lot, and I think it's free as well, and it does kind of the same thing as Riverside. So Riverside, I think there's a small subscription.
Big money, yeah, big money for.
But if you're looking for very low barrier to entry, Zencaster does kind of something similar, and you'll get video and audio out of your recordings there. Yeah.
Hi there. My name's Hussein. I have a podcast. It's called Lawyered. I interview top Canadian lawyers. We talk about current issues in their field. Doing it for about 8 years. Not to fanboy. I'm a big Backline listener. I also do it today. Yeah. Anyways, so my question is, I was wondering if you had any suggestions in terms of promoting a podcast, particularly for people who are not like podcast people. Like my show is like very niche, so mostly lawyers who listen, but sometimes when I'm pitching or talking to someone, like, I have a show, and they're like, oh, I don't follow podcasts. I'm not into podcasts. So I was wondering if that's something you've encountered, or if you have any tips or suggestions about trying to like convert non-podcasters to try one out.
I just removed them from my life. I don't need that kind of energy around me.
Yeah.
No.
Converting non-podcasters is almost impossible. It is tough. But I kind of have maybe an answer to your question that's not exactly answering the question, but I'll say the most success we've had in promotion and in gaining new listeners and introducing shows to new people is collaborating with other podcasts, similar shows, either guest swaps, right? Or, you guest on their show, they guest on yours, that kind of thing, running ads on each other's shows, right? Just introducing, again, it's targeting your audience, right? The same thing I was saying before, but it's, if their show's kind of similar to yours in some way, you can introduce yourself to their audience, and then maybe some of them will like you, think you're interesting, or like the idea of your show, and they'll come over and listen to you. And that's where we have most success, is cross-promotion. Yeah.
I'm telling you right now, the Backline would love to cross-promo with you. If there are improvisers who are also lawyers, we're going to get that niche, and they're going to be listening to both. That sounds wicked, dude. That sounds so cool.
Yeah, it would be really hard to like try and convince someone to try a podcast who like is dead set against the idea of it, right?
Wait, to listen to it or to make them?
Well, you can make someone do anything if you have enough rope.
No. Are we trying to get non-podcasters to listen to podcasts or to make podcasts themselves?
To listen to, the question was to listen to it,
listen.
right?
Okay.
People who I've never listened to a podcast. I don't know, I feel like that's kind of the barrier that I'm trying to.
Yeah, I guess it just being I just always go you've listened to the radio, you've sat down and watched a TV show, so it's that's sort of when you I've found that sort of presenting it it's like a radio drama, and they go, oh, radio drama, very nice, and then suddenly that it breaks that wall of the veil of or whatever of podcasting. It's weird, and I don't know what it is.
Makes it seem more classy.
It does, and then they listen and they go, what?
It's like the radio, but you can listen to it whenever you want, and it's not inundated with commercials and music you don't want to listen to. It's basically like radio, but better in every way. So why are you listening to radio? Get on board. It's 2022. Come on.
Any other questions? Sure.
I'm reading up as I listen to you, but I know very little about podcasts. That's why I'm here. And one thing that stands out for me is that it is unregulated so far. Is that true? And if it is true, do you see regulation of some sort coming? Because I think that is the essence of what makes podcasts special. I understand it being unregulated.
So the question is, are podcasts unregulated, and do we foresee regulation happening because that's the unregulated nature of it makes it what's podcasts are special.
No, I don't think it's ever going to be regulated. I think if Joe Rogan is the biggest podcaster in the world, and he's saying whatever he wants to say, I feel like the industry is probably going to be chasing those numbers. So I don't think regulation is going to happen, even if it was possible. I don't even know how you would regulate the internet in that way. That would be so challenging. So I don't think so.
I think the biggest thing that I think of when I think about the future of podcasting is not so much regulation. I don't really know how that would work, but I think the biggest thing is that there's a lot of money coming in now from big networks, big celebrities and stuff like that, and it's kind of changing who gets exposure, who gets access to stuff. And that, and it's the same thing it was the same thing with just like the internet in general, where you went from like everyone's got a website and you can just kind of stumble across it on a web ring to like now it's like you just have like 5 big websites run everything. And the thing I always think about is like there's so much money that's entering the market right now from like the same backers that like it's just choking out other stuff, because like Amazon can promote everything. I don't have the money to promote my stuff in that same way. So like there will be still lots of niche things, but much like network TV, like movies and all these things, that there will be the big giant players who I worry are going to just like snake over everything like vines crawling over a walkway.
Oh, so depressing.
I know it bums me out every time I think about it, but I also am just like, oh no, they found us.
Subscriptions to all these different networks to access our favorite pods. Like that's what I'm scared of now. It's pushing me away from pods.
We're already there, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of subscription options, paywalls, whether it's Patreon, Apple has their own thing, right? It's going to keep coming. I think Spotify's doing it if they haven't already. And then also people just do it themselves. They run their own paywalls, hide shows behind the paywall. I think the reason that podcasting exists is because it's free. So I think there will always be a free option. But I think the more popular shows, even right now, we're already there, right? The more popular shows, all of the popular shows have a paywall where their exclusive fans who want more content can go there if they want to support them.
Increases quality then if they can get more money in through
Yeah.
subscriptions.
Can you come up to the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're thinking it's going to increase quality if they can get the subscribers? Like, I'm just wondering how it's going to change long term.
I think it will. I mean, they will now be getting, paid more for their work, and that means they can put more into it.
That makes sense. Thanks, guys.
From their basement, yeah.
No, they're definitely, the money thing is definitely changing, I think, a lot of stuff. And yeah, there is lots of podcasts have tiers, paywalls, and I think there is good stuff to it. I'm supportive of things like Patreon and stuff like that, which does give like small independent people access to like any sort of income, because like getting sponsorships is hard, getting advertisers is hard, and if your fans are like they were like, I want to sponsor a little bit, that's great, and like that's super important. I'm very much here for like paying artists and stuff like that. But then yeah, of course. Your big corporate overlords come in and they're just like slamming those paywalls down on some of these shows, and sometimes it is a fine line to walk sometimes, and that's the tough part.
Yeah, strangely enough, if you want to keep podcasts free, the best way to do that is to pay for them. So if there is an indie podcaster who you really, really love who has a Patreon, you dropping $1 a month keeps that free for everyone else who doesn't want to pay. I feel like as time goes on, we get lured to bigger networks. We get lured to doing shows that can pay regularly. So yes, paying your favorite indie creators is really helpful. Thanks.
Especially for the weird shows, like the little weird niche shows. One of my favorite shows has been on for years and years and years. It's just this incredibly bizarre show where they just read stuff they find on the internet. That's all it is. They just go and they find like a forum about like audio cables and sorry? It is the F plus, yes. Oh no, someone else out there has brainworms as well. And yeah, just like the episode about like the guys who are just really obsessed with audio quality. I want to listen to that. I want to listen to this thing where it's just them reading the posts of people comparing cables. It's so weird. That's never going on a network. So
Awesome. I guess that's it for more question? I So the question is podcast, a free speech area, or are you subject to like libel, or can you get in trouble? Can you use copywritten music, stuff like that?
You know what? I think I have an answer. I have a colleague who works on a lawyer show. Are we liable?
This is not legal advice. But yeah, so like, free speech only applies when the government's trying to restrict your own speech. So that's one thing. But in terms of like libel, yeah, if you're saying things that are disparaging someone else, and there's no truth to that, so if you're making truthful statements, that's a defense to libel and slander. But otherwise, if you're publishing content and it's intended for dissemination and it's impacts someone's reputation, that could be subject to reputation or defamation, whether it be libel or slander. But none of this was legal advice. You did not hear it from me.
Yeah. And you can hear more on our podcast, The Lawyer Show / The Backline, coming soon.
Awesome. So, any other answers to that? Probably not. The lawyer probably has the best. The best
I think
take
he's
on
right.
it.
Yeah, he's right.
It's the same as anything. You can't just go out there and just say horrible things. Somebody can still sue you.
All right, you guys ever work with like or collaborate with charities? Like, I don't know, if you listen, donate here, or I don't know, something like that. I'm just wondering.
I've never worked with a charity, but that's like a really great idea.
We've done some work with Ronald McDonald House in the past. Just kind of, yes. The answer to your question is yes.
Yes. Oh, and if yes, then what's it like? What's it been? Do you foresee something like that happening in the future? Like, I work with a lot of charities, so it's like there's like Sick Kids, there's Ronald McDonald, right? So if you want to listen to more content, I don't know, pitch to this charity, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think that's a great idea, like Rob said, and we would definitely be interested in that. If there's some idea you have, you want to send us an email or something. We love that.
Yeah, I haven't really seen a model like out there with charities other than just like straight ads on the show or like host promoting a specific charity, but to like paywall a podcast unless you donate to a charity or something. Yeah, I haven't seen anything like that. Yeah.
Except for NPR. Other than that, there aren't any.
All right. I think that's all the time we have. Actually, it's 6 o'clock. So thank you for coming. And thank you to all the panelists up here. Make sure to check out their podcast / podcast network.
Yeah, if you have any more questions about podcasts, or just want to tell me about your podcast, come down to the Sonar Network booth. We're downstairs in the community zone, and I'd love to chat with you.
Awesome. Have a great rest of the con.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Great job, everybody. What a nice time.
Yeah, fun.
Yeah. Time to put your hats on when you're done with the